Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Schriever Spacepower series. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and with me is Charles Galbraith, Senior Resident Fellow at our Spacepower Advantage Center of Excellence. As space capabilities, services, and effects are now an indispensable part of daily life and are foundational to the structure and operation of the United States military. The United States Space Command is the combatant command charged with ensuring that the American people, and American warfighters in particular, never experience a day without space. Today, that job is more important and more challenging than ever. Increasing threats, growing congestion, and expanding user communities add complexity and criticality to the jobs performed by each member of U.S. Space Command. That's why we're thrilled to have General Steve Whiting, the commander of the United States Space Command, with us today. So General Whiting, thanks very much for taking the time to be here today. I think what we could do to kick this series off is to give you first the opportunity to give us some of your perspectives on just what you have going on inside Space Command today. So over to you.
Well, thanks, General Deptula. Great to see you again, Charles. Thank you for having me back to the Mitchell Institute. Always great to be here. And thank you for what you do. I always say space is a team sport, and it takes a lot of different organizations because no one country, department, agency, command can do all the things we need to do in space. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those agencies are all have the word space in the name, and so it can be confusing who does what. So let me focus on what the unique aspects are, unique contributions are of U.S. Space Command. In fact, if you go to Title 10 of U.S. Code, it actually lays out what the primary duties of a combatant commander are. You can imagine when federal law says your primary duties are, I'm very interested in what follows. And there's 3 points that follow. Number one, it says my primary duty is to prepare for or to plan for the employment of the armed forces, to execute defense strategies and prepare for military contingencies. So that is job number one for us, is preparing operational plans for potential contingencies. Secondly, we are to take actions as necessary to deter conflict. So every day we're watching what's going on in the world and seeing how we can use space to best deter any conflict from happening or escalation from occurring. And of course, that means we're constantly working with others in that team sport to figure out what the best way to do that is. And then third, it says my primary duty is to command the armed forces of the United States as directed by the Secretary of Defense and the President. So we've been given, assigned, and attached forces, and so our job is to command those forces to execute the missions that have been assigned to us by the President. And the President assigns those missions through a document called the Unified Command Plan that he revises every 2 years, and it gives a set of general tasks to the combatant commanders, things like if you're a combatant commander with an area of responsibility, you're responsible for leading U.S. military operations in that AOR. Well, you know what? This version of U.S. Space Command is a geographic combatant command. We like to use the word astrographic. We think that better articulates it, but nonetheless, any operations starting 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface and extending out to infinity, we're responsible for leading those. And then the Unified Command Plan says that we've been given 5 unique tasks that no other combatant command has responsibility for. Number one, conduct space operations, no surprise, but doing missions like satellite communications, missile warning, positioning, navigation, and timing, but also missions like protect and defend. How do we make sure that we are safe against the threats that are now arrayed against us? Number two, we are the global SATCOM manager responsible for all DoD SATCOM and adjudicating those requirements across the DoD. Number three, we're the global sensor manager. So any DoD sensor that can do missile warning, missile defense, or space domain awareness, it's our job to integrate those, advocate for them, and to plan accordingly. Fourth, we are responsible for trans-regional missile defense planning and operations support. And then finally, we're the Space Joint Force provider. So those are our unique tasks. Now, let me put that into a narrative context. When I talk about our mission, I talk about 3 moral imperatives that U.S. Space Command must fulfill for the nation. Number one, we have to provide the nation, the Joint Force, and our allies the space effects they have become dependent on. I won't go into a ton of detail because I can take questions on this, but not surprising to this audience, but the way we defend our nation is totally dependent on space. And the other services are sized accordingly. They don't have the force structure to fight the way they would have prior to space capability, us delivering those space capabilities. Our second moral imperative is now that the threats have so increased against us, we have to protect and defend our current constellations against those threats. And today's constellations were built either before those threats have become operational, like we've seen in the last couple of years, or the requirements were laid down, and then they were built to an older set of requirements. And then third and finally, as countries like China and Russia have made their terrestrial forces more lethal, more precise, and more far-ranging because they've gone to space, we have to help our joint force be protected against those space-enabled capabilities. That takes a lot of folks to do that, but we have a role in that. So we think our mission is so important. We talk about those moral imperatives, and then happy to talk about how we interact with others in this broader space enterprise because they're all key teammates for us. But those are our unique roles at U.S. Space Command.
Well, thanks very much for that rundown. That's clear and concise and very useful. So let's jump into some of that detail that you mentioned we might want to chat about some more. So you testified recently at the Senate Armed Services Committee that the United States is experiencing a window of vulnerability in that we're transitioning to a more resilient space architecture while adversary ASAT, anti-satellite technology is already mature. So what kind of steps is U.S. Space Command taking to mitigate some of the current vulnerabilities that we're facing on the basis of what the threats can present?
Yeah, it's one of the things we're watching each and every day is how can we operate in the face of these threats that are now arrayed against us? And for a combatant command, our event horizon is kind of now until about 2 or 3 years out. Certainly we care beyond that, but we're not the ones acquiring the systems. We're not recruiting the force, so we're working with the services. So I'm kind of focused on each and every day, how can I maximize the capability that I have today? And so our number one priority at U.S. Space Command, we've laid out 4, but our number one is to prepare and posture to maximize combat readiness by 2027. So that's my 3-year event horizon. So we are executing tests and operations and exercises with our with our service components to improve our tactics, techniques, and procedures using today's capabilities. How can we better take all that we have today and stitch it together? We sometimes call that closing the kill chain. We have a whole series of sensors that have been built. We have C2 systems, we have effectors, but how can we pull the string all the way through that so we can effectively use it on tactically relevant timelines? So we have some efforts ongoing to work that all across the kill chain. We're trying to maximize our partnerships. If space is a team sport, how do you get the most out of those partnerships? So our international partnerships are vital, and we do those at various echelons. But at the top, at the closest levels of cooperation, we have a named operation in space called Operation Olympic Defender. And so that today is us, the Australians, the Canadians, and the Brits operating together in space, sharing information. We've actually invited France, Germany, and New Zealand to join that. And we hope to have a positive response from them in the next few months. But also maximizing our commercial partnerships through an organization, or that's probably too strong a word, an entity we have called the Commercial Integration Cell out of Vandenberg, and then the Joint Commercial Operations, or JCO, in Colorado Springs. That's important for us because as we leverage those partnerships, we build capacity, we build resilience,
Right.
And that allows us to operate more effectively.
No, thanks much for that. Charles?
So one of the ways we've heard U.S. Space Command talk about closing the gap, maybe not now, but in a couple of years, is dynamic space operations, the ability to maneuver without regret. But as we're shifting to low Earth orbit satellites and proliferating those, there are some folks that say that the dynamic space operations isn't necessarily applicable to that. Refueling satellites that only last a couple of years may not be practical. Can you help clarify what the requirement is for dynamic space operation and why that's so important?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, today when we operate in space, we're really operating in, even though everything in space is moving and it's dynamic, it's really positional warfare because we try to go to energy neutral states. And typically that's because we only have the fuel we've launched with, and so we never want to move, or if we do, we always ask the question, how much life is this going to take off the back end of the satellite? And so we want to get to a place where we can maneuver in the domain just like we do in every other domain. You can't imagine talking about a tank or a ship or an airplane without its ability to maneuver across the battlefield. Now, your question was very good because certainly there are some missions where we would not want to try to refuel, you know, a 6,000 satellite P-LEO constellation, right, because that inherent those numbers give you that kind of resilience and give you the ability to operate wherever you need. But imagine now you're a singular high-value satellite in geosynchronous orbit, for example, that maybe you're being targeted by a red capability. And what if that red capability can refuel, but you can't? Now, it can persistently chase you until you run out of fuel. And that's not a state you want to be in. You want to be able to continue your mission. Or we want to be able to operate beyond the traditional orbits that we typically have. Today, if I say, you know, hey, there's a threat in LEO, well, I can get to LEO 200 to 800 kilometers. If you say, hey, there's a threat in medium Earth orbit, I know how to get to that altitude. If you say there's a threat in GEO, I know how to get there. But if somebody goes in between those orbits, places we don't typically operate, today we don't have a great capacity to get there. So we want a maneuvering capability that allows us to maneuver through multiple orbital regimes. We think that will help limit the opportunity for operational surprise. So it is a mission by mission, orbit by orbit determination, but we see certain missions, certain orbits where dynamic space operations, sustained space maneuver makes great sense for the nation.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they don't have to shoot you to kill you. They can chase you to death.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Well, continuing the threat discussion, understand last month the United States accused Russia of launching an ASAT near one of our reconnaissance satellites. So the question essentially is, how can we be so sure? And then what is it that we're doing to essentially mitigate this kind of acute threat?
You know, everything we do at U.S. Space Command has to be informed by intelligence. So we say we're an intelligence-led organization. And additionally, we have the world's best space domain awareness capability. Now, the fact that you're the world's best may not mean you have exactly what you want. So I always will want more space domain awareness capability. But we've been tracking objects on orbit for decades and decades and decades. And so when we saw the launch in middle of May of just a month ago or so, we can look at those orbital parameters and we can compare that launch to launches that the Russians did in 2017, 2019, 2022, that looked like this class of counter space weapon that they've tested previously, and now it appears that they've put on orbit in an operational capacity. And then we look at where they launched it, and they launched it what we call coplanar to a national security satellite. And that doesn't seem to be accidental because they've done that multiple times in a row now, and being coplanar gives them short amount of operational response time to potentially hold at risk one of our satellites. So those are the kind of things that lead us to this assessment that this is a counter space capability that the Russians have launched. And so as we think about how to mitigate that, you know, it begins with indications and warning. Do we understand what those systems are? Do we understand what kind of timelines they're operating on? Making sure that we have excellent information sharing across our enterprise so that owner-operators of satellites are not surprised by these kind of things. And we have those relationships inside the U.S. government, inside the Joint Force, along with our commercial partners and internationally. And then, you know, doing all that we can to rehearse for these kind of situations and take appropriate action when required.
Thanks for that.
So Russia's acute threat, but clearly the pacing threat is China. In fact, you even mentioned in your opening comments the rate at which China is integrating space to make their own terrestrial forces more effective. You know, as an example, in January of this year, they had about 359 intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites in orbit. That's 3 times the amount they had just in 2018. So how is this shifting landscape impacting the way Space Command approaches your planning efforts?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about China, because I've used the term before that they're moving at breathtaking speed. I mean, it really is something to behold, and you can kind of bucket that into two aspects. One is how quickly they've moved to field counter space capabilities. Everything from offensive cyber capabilities to jammers for GPS, SATCOM, high energy lasers, direct descent, ASATs, on orbit capabilities, just across the breadth of capabilities from reversible to non-reversible. We've seen them move very quickly. But then, as I referenced at the beginning, they've also moved very quickly to build their own space capabilities to enable their terrestrial forces. You know, they've been watching us since Desert Storm, how we've used space to enable our tactical battlefield with all of our terrestrial forces, and they've gone to space for those same advantages because they want to try to keep the United States outside the first island chain, the second island chain. So they've gone to space to do that. So our planning, is completely informed by these kind of assessments. We can't wish those away. As a combatant commander, I have to be concerned about the capabilities arrayed against us. And so because of this concern, my first international trip back in April was to go first to Indo-PACOM headquarters in Hawaii and meet with Admiral Aquilino right as he was about to transition out. And I got to meet with Admiral Papara before he got in the seat. Make sure we are well synced with them. And in fact, we have a joint integrated space team that sits in their headquarters each and every day. It's my liaison element there. We have excellent relationship with the Space Forces Component Command there in Hawaii as well. But then I went on to Japan and South Korea and had very important discussions with those key partners. Because we all are concerned about the rate at which China is developing in space, and so we want to make sure that we're working as well together as we can, because we do believe we're all stronger together.
Yeah, well, speaking of all stronger together, it's not just China; they're also cooperating with Russia and Iran and others in space. So how does that dynamic impact the way Space Command does its planning efforts?
Yeah, obviously we're very interested in those relationships. As we've seen Russia struggle on the battlefield in Ukraine, it appears that they've gone to these other countries that you've named looking for assistance, and maybe they're willing to share now, or cooperate more in the space sphere. Certainly that's of concern to us. A country like North Korea, the UN Security Council has said they should not be using ballistic missile technology for any purpose. So when they do a space launch, they're violating UN Security Council resolutions. We want to see Russia continue to live up to all of its counterproliferation requirements. But it does appear there is a growing sense of cooperation in the space sphere between these four countries, at least bilaterally within these four countries. And that's something we're keenly observing.
Thank you.
Now, a lot of attention is paid to the relationship between the Space Force as well as Space Command. But obviously, you receive forces from the other services as well, Navy, Marine Corps, Army. Could you talk a little bit about how you integrate the forces that are provided by the different service components?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a joint command, this is our daily bread and butter. Now, we do have this unique relationship with the U.S. Space Force. It's the only pairing of a service and a combatant command solely focused on the same domain. Of course, at the beginning, I walked through kind of what our unique roles are. They have their unique roles. They recruit the Guardians, they train the Guardians, they equip the Guardians. And so we have a very cooperative relationship with General Saltzman and the Space Force team. But we have service components from all of the other services as well. And we even have a Coast Guardsman assigned to our headquarters. So we cover down on all the U.S. services. But those other services not only bring us real capability that assists with our mission, whether that is delivering space effects, whether it's protecting and defending or protecting the joint force from space-enabled attack, but they also bring us expertise. And so my headquarters is a joint headquarters, and so it's full of members of those other services who bring us that perspective as sailors, as Marines, as soldiers, as airmen, and that's a unique perspective. Just as we say Space Force Guardians bring a unique perspective. And it's that, for us, it's that marriage of some people with deep space expertise with the terrestrial forces and bringing that together. That's really our secret sauce. I will say in particular, the Army, the Navy, and the Marines have really focused on even developing and growing their own space cadre, because they know for their terrestrial forces to be successful against a great power competition foe, they're going to have indigenous space expertise that allows them to operate, with knowledge of space, but also with systems that assist them to do that. And so all of that together combines and allows us to execute our missions.
So it's not just the joint community, but you mentioned earlier Olympic Defender and working with allies and partners. That's always been a strong suit for the United States. We don't go to war alone. We bring our allies and partners with us. It's a huge force multiplier. I believe you have 33 different international agreements for space situational awareness currently in place. So how does this sort of partnership increase your set of options when addressing threats posed by Russia or China?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Charles. This system of alliances that we have is a unique feature of the U.S. defense enterprise that is not shared by China or Russia, and it makes us stronger. I mentioned earlier, it helps us develop resilience and capacity. It also brings us unique perspectives. Our allies are around the world. They are on every continent, and they give us a perspective about that continent that as we're sitting here in North America, we might not be able to bring ourselves. Sometimes they bring us unique accesses into other countries as well, where they have a relationship with some third country that maybe we don't have, and so that can be beneficial to us as well. We are able to share information, and that's a bilateral sharing of information, and then we can develop tactics, techniques, and procedures together. But just to give you the full array of all of our international partnerships, you can think about it as a pyramid. At that base layer are the space situational awareness sharing agreements that you mentioned, Charles. Yes, 30 plus countries plus another 140 companies and international organizations that we've signed these agreements with. The next level up is a annual exercise that we have called Global Sentinel. We execute that out at Vandenberg. Over 25 countries are involved. Some of them very traditional U.S. partners, others are not, but they're interested in learning more how they can cooperate with us in the space situational awareness area. And so we'll all get together out at Vandenberg for 2 weeks and figure that out together. And then there's a grouping of countries called the Combined Space Operations Initiative, or CSPO. That's run out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense Space Policy. But there it's a grouping of 10 countries where we can collaborate and talk about, okay, how do we really, nail down further cooperation in joint or combined space operations. And then at the top of that pyramid is Operation Olympic Defender. So 4 countries today. And then again, we now have invites out to France, Germany, and New Zealand. So as companies or countries can kind of enter at the bottom with an SSA sharing agreement. When they're ready, go to Global Sentinel. Some of those countries advance to a point in our cooperation where we can go to CSPO, and then some of those countries advance up to Operation Olympic Defender. So it's just a wide number of relationships that give us this additional capacity, capability that we believe is positive for all of us.
Now, in addition to the international partners that you spoke about, you alluded to earlier, a rapidly growing commercial sector that's also delivering some impressive capabilities. Could you chat a bit about the steps that Space Command is taking to integrate our commercial partners into your equation?
Yeah, I think U.S. commercial space industry is one of our nation's leading advantages, period dot. Not just for space, but period dot. Because I think in many ways, our commercial space industries lead over other nations' commercial industries is widening today. And so we absolutely have to be catching those curves, if you will, curves of performance, curves of cost, all those kind of things. Now, again, we're not an acquisition organization at U.S. Space Command. So, we work major acquisitions. Those are done through the services, through Space Development Agency, through the National Reconnaissance Office, through others. We partner with them on, on our requirements, but we're not the ones driving those acquisitions. So we focus on how can we operate in the domain together. And there's 2 principal places we do that in U.S. Space Command. One is the Commercial Integration Cell, the CIC, where we have 9 companies who contract with the U.S. government for providing satellite communications or intelligence from space. And through a partnership we've arranged, at the Commercial Integration Cell, we share information with them on what we're seeing intelligence-wise, what's going on with our constellations. They share what's happening with their constellations. And the unique thing about this is, even though these 9 companies compete for contracts elsewhere in the government, here we've all agreed to cooperate. because we think if we share information about what's happening in the domain, what threats we're seeing, what's occurring, that we'll all be better together. So that's a really unique organization that now we're seeing some of our partner nations start to replicate. And then the JCO, the Joint Commercial Operations, it's so innovative and so unique, it's actually hard to describe. But we have just this world-class leader, Miss Barb Goff, who's kind of led that. But basically, she started from the idea, how can I go get all the unclassified data that I want to get, and then bring in partner nations, some of whom are non-traditional US partners in space, and then merge all of that data at a data level to provide indications and warnings of what's happening in space, and by doing that, also try to incentivize a marketplace for SDA. And she's just done a fantastic job. And that we rely on that JCO each and every day to give us operational insights of what's happening, and that tips and cues then into our space surveillance network and our government bespoke systems. So that's two ways that we're
Okay. A bit of a follow-up for you. Are there unique factors in working with commercial entities that you've got to consider? For example, limiting who they might cooperate with.
Yeah, yes is the answer to that question. It's not different than other domains where if you're working with U.S. government or allied contractors, you do have an interest in who owns them and who they're working with, and there's a process in the U.S. government to review those kind of things. There's also, areas we're interested in, like cyber defenses of their systems. We don't want other countries to be able to come in and exfil data out of their systems. So there are processes inside of all of the various stakeholder organizations, the acquisition organizations, the services, and at the COCOM level to make sure that all of that's laid flat so that we can operate with confidence with these companies. My experience has been, U.S. industry has fulfilled their contracts with us as we expect them to do, and they've been a good partner for us.
One more follow-up in this vein. One of your responsibilities is to support civil and commercial space flight, and we recently saw both Starliner and Starship launches. Could you address what roles, if any, did U.S. Space Command play in those launches?
Yeah, I tell you, I love space launches, and
I think we all do.
Yeah, every 2 or 3 times a week, I'll get an alert on my computer that one of the companies is about to launch, and I flip over and I watch it every time. And those were 2 exciting launches. Starliner, Boeing Starliner, that was a NASA launch. It's their second provider for what they call commercial crew, which is their ability to launch U.S. astronauts on U.S. rockets from U.S. soil. So as a NASA endeavor, we're not directly involved in that, except one of my assigned tasks is I am the DoD manager for support to human spaceflight. And it's actually our Air Force component down at 1st Air Force at Tyndall Air Force Base, Lieutenant General Steve Nordhaus, who executes that for me each and every day. So what does that look like? Well, if you think back to the Apollo missions, when the capsules were coming back and landing in the ocean, it was Navy vessels that were out doing that rescue. Today, those forces fall under Space Command authorities as executed by our Air Force component as the supported commander. So for Boeing Starliner, had that launch gone non-nominal and astronauts needed to be rescued, it would be DoD forces that were postured to go do that rescue under 1st Air Force. Now, SpaceX Starship, very exciting launch, excited about that that technology and what that means for this nation to be able to lift that much mass to orbit and then to come back and be reused. That was purely a SpaceX test launch. So obviously we're cheering on and applauding that. We appreciate the work the FAA has done as the licensing organization for commercial space to enable these kind of test campaigns, and we want them to understand that these are important capabilities for the nation and continue to work those licensing, and they've done a good job with that, and so we're just excited to watch and hopefully see that get certified for national security launches at some point in the future.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about it already a couple times, but space domain awareness or space situational awareness is foundational. You talked about it with your pyramid of cooperation. You talked about the work that Barb Goff is doing. But when you're taking all of these different threads from commercial, from U.S. military, from international partners, how do you actually fuse all that data together to make a coherent picture?
Yeah, data is a strategic resource. And I think commercial industry has come to that realization over the last decade. And we have a fair amount of data that washes around in our system. Now today, unfortunately, I don't have a single common operational picture that I can point to bring us all that data in a coherent manner. So we're working with the services, and we've emphasized this in our integrated priority list, which is a document that the combatant commands get to provide of what's most important to us, and it's called the integrated priority list. And then we've also emphasized this in our unfunded priority list, which is a document that I have to give to the Congress per their per law, which requires me to do that. And in that, we emphasize we need improved command and control capabilities to fuse all this data, be able to display it to us. Now, can we operate without having that single common operational picture? Absolutely, but we want to do better. I'm not quite ready to announce all the details, but me and my J6 have just decided in the last month or so that we're going to pick a test case, one of our mission areas where we feel like there's a lot of data, and over a reasonable amount of time, and I'm still waiting to get that POAM back of what that time will be and what it's going to cost, and a reasonable cost, we're going to be able to fuse all the data we have and put it on a single pane of glass. Now, we're not an acquisition organization, but we think this is the kind of value a COCOM can add because we can deliver that within our event horizon of now to 3 years. And it's about merging data. It's not about building a new satellite system, but it's taking the data we have and using it better. So a lot of words to say, there's work to be done in this area, and we're going to try to pilot some of that here as we move forward.
That's great. Utilizing what we have is very important. And I think I know the answer to this question because you alluded to it earlier, because your appetite's always going to grow. Yeah. But is there still a demand signal for additional sensor feeds from other locations, or just greater capacity for domain awareness?
You can't give me too much space domain awareness. I'll take all I can get. Ideally, every object in space we could point something at it and keep custody of all of it. Yeah. And by the way, there's about 45,000 pieces of trackable debris or trackable objects on orbit. That number's gone up 75% since Space Command was stood back up in August of 2019. So that number's gone up almost double. So there's a lot up there to track. And there are some systems coming that the services and others are going to deliver. So, for example, the Space Force and the National Reconnaissance Office launched a system called Silent Barker several months ago, which is providing space domain awareness and indications and warning, very important for us. The Space Force is moving forward with a new system called DARK, the Deep Space Advanced Radar Concept, which will help us to maintain better track of things in deep space, which would be very important for us. I'd love to get more commercial data, but I don't want that data to be duplicative to what we have, and commercial does provide us some unique capabilities there. And then I want the ability to survey and to get to non-traditional orbits. I talked about that a little bit with dynamic space operations. Today, yep, space is massive. There's all this volume of places you can go, but we tend to operate in kind of these 4 areas. One is low Earth orbit out to about 800 kilometers, then at medium Earth orbit where the GPS satellites are, and then geosynchronous, and then some in highly elliptical. There's a lot of volume of space in there to be surprised in, and we want to reduce the opportunity for strategic surprise by being able to surveil and get to those. And then finally, we're looking forward at a future mission. How do we keep track of what's going on in lunar orbit, cislunar, or ex-geo, beyond geosynchronous out to cislunar? Today, we don't see military activity happening there, but we want to make sure that we don't get surprised. And we support the Air Force Research Lab and some work they're doing to launch a satellite called Oracle in the next couple of years that'll help us to do that.
Exciting.
Now, one of the key roles of domain awareness is to identify and attribute irresponsible or hostile behavior. Are there any new capabilities that are required to help you accomplish that mission?
I've just listed a series of space domain awareness new capabilities that we would love to have. So I think all of those will help us with that. I think continuing to improve our command and control systems. Today we still in some ways use a command and control system for our space domain awareness based on technology from the 1980s, 1990s, a system called SPADOC, and it has been a workhorse for us and done very well. We've modernized the hardware, it's all on modern hardware, but the internal software is still pretty old. And so working with the Space Force and their acquisition arms to deliver an improved command and control capability for us in that mission area would be very helpful. So we can start to use machine learning and AI tools. You know, today it's still a manually intensive process to see that a potential threat satellite has maneuvered and to figure that out and respond to it, when that seems to me to be a mission area tailor-made for AI, ML, as you weed through all this data and then find the data points that don't look nominal, or over time you've learned these are maneuvers. There's been some steps into that direction, but I think there's a lot more we could do there.
Thank you.
So we talked about the Russian Orbital ASAT. We know that there's a Chinese potential ASAT with a robotic arm, but the fact is most of the threats to our space capabilities are ground-based. Direct ascent ASATs, jammers, ground-based lasers, all of the cyber threats, those are all ground-based threat vectors. So how is U.S. Space Command working with other COCOMs and the intelligence communities to make sure you've got the awareness and the response options you need to address these threats?
Yeah, those are vital partnerships for us. And as an intelligence-led organization, our relationship with the intelligence community is just really vital. We have a very robust J2 Intel organization at U.S. Space Command. And in fact, I think since the stand-up of Space Command and the stand-up of Space Force, the area we may have made the most progress in is space intelligence. Doesn't mean it's exactly where we want it yet, but we have grown that capacity and we've really improved our ability at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. So the Intel community has been very gracious, and I have dozens of members of those intelligence communities that sit inside my headquarters, linking us with them as we execute our as we have need for intelligence. And then with the other combatant commands, I mentioned that I have liaison elements in each of them. And just to be fair, there's one combatant command that we have not filled that liaison cell yet with, and that's TRANSCOM, and I've discussed that with General Van Ovos, and we're going to get that finalized this summer. But all the other combatant commands, I have this team that sits in their headquarters to help share planning. And so as we are looking at targets of interest to U.S. Space Command, they plug right into the targeting processes in those combatant commands, and vice versa. If those combatant commands have things of interest in space, they plug right back into ours as well. I tell you, we have some very forward-leaning geographic combatant commands out there who are very carefully watching how China is working with countries in those other AORs to build out what we call space-enabling locations and capabilities, things like space domain awareness sites, telemetry tracking and commanding locations. And we have a very good partnership with those other combatant commands to identify those and then to think about response options accordingly. And so that's part of that broader teamwork of space. It really does now include the other combatant commands, because I can tell you, some of them think very deeply about space all of the time, to the point that it's challenged me, are we thinking as rigorously and as hard as they are about these tough operational problems?
Well, that provides a great segue to my next question, which is that folks traditionally have thought about space as a supporting domain, enhancing operations of other combatant commands. That support's essential, and I know that it will continue. But could you comment a little bit about how other combatant commands are supporting U.S. Space Command?
Great question, General Deptula. And at U.S. Space Command, I like to say we are both an ING command and an ED command, meaning we're a supporting command and a support ED. Let me just spend a moment on that supporting. I said that right at the beginning, our #1 moral responsibility is to continue to provide space effects to the rest of the joint force, the nation, and our allies. And I love what the philosophy that General Jackie Van Ovost and her team at TRANSCOM, they just imbue this idea. We are an ING command. Whatever you need, we're going to give it to you, so that we're as invested in your success as we can be. And so I've told our team, when we are supporting someone else, their success is our success. We've got to be all in on that. But we have been given this AOR. And by Title 10 and by the Unified Command Plan, it is our responsibility to lead operations there. And so other combatant commands understand that, and they're working with us to support that, whether that's, I can't name all the combatant commands, but whether that's U.S. Cyber Command helping us to think about how do we defend our space capabilities, whether on orbit or terrestrial, from cyber intrusion or attack, or how do we use offensive cyber for space purposes. U.S. Special Operations Command has unique accesses, unique partnerships, unique relationships. They are constantly talking to us about how their capabilities can assist us in our mission area. And then I've talked a little bit about the geographic combatant commands as they're thinking about how does my fleet survive under this Chinese ISR system that you mentioned, Charles? That takes cooperative effort, some of it on terra firma, where we're supporting them, and some of it's going to have to happen in space where they're supporting us. So it is a series of supporting and supported relationships, and we've got to make sure that we can execute all of that at the speed of need, so that all the operations that must occur to protect our U.S. fighting men and women occur at the speed of need.
So shifting back to the relationship between Space Command and U.S. Space Force, they're one of your largest force providers. They're in the process of instituting a new program called Space Force Generation, or SPA4Gen, where you basically have a prepare phase, a ready phase, and a commit phase. And as the end user of those committed forces, how do you see this new approach impacting Space Command operations and readiness?
Yeah, you know, my last job as the commander of Space Operations Command, SPOC, inside of the Space Force, I was fully involved in a lot of that planning. And now, of course, at the Combatant Command role, not my job to get involved in the details of how the Space Force intends to run their generation model, but the output of that is where we expect to see that improvement, because as they create white space for their crews to do advanced training, as they improve the training ranges, the test that's going in, the test capabilities that's going into validating new tactics, techniques, and procedures, all of that accrues to our benefit. And the key person here to help with that is our Space Force Component Commander, Lieutenant General Doug Shess, out at U.S. Space Forces Space at Vandenberg. He and his team, they have a foot in the service side and they have a foot in the joint side. And so I know he's out working inside the Space Force with Lieutenant General Dave Miller and the team at SPOC, and Major General Tim Shaba and the team at STARCOM, and Lieutenant General Phil Garant and the team at Space Systems Command, to make sure that as that process is running, General Shess can measure and understand what the readiness improvements are, and then communicate that back into me. And that's vital, because I have to provide my readiness up to the joint staff. And so as we see that those improvements happening in the Space Force, that will accrue up to our readiness improving and widening our options based on that improvement that we're seeing inside the Space Force. So, you know, we want to be supportive of whatever we can do, but we're happy to see this evolution continue.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the rundown that we've already gone through, General Whiting. I think what we're going to do now is shift to our audience to hear what is on their minds.
Great.
So I think all of you out there know the drill by now. I'll call on you, and when I do, please unmute your mic, state your name and affiliation before asking your question. And then don't forget, you can also submit questions using the Q&A function, which I am going to shift to right now for our first question from a dear and I dare say old friend, retired Major General Charlie Dunlap. And here's what General Dunlap's question is for you. Sir, the U.S. is increasingly relying upon civilian capabilities for space warfighting. Are you comfortable that the civilians and civilian entities involved understand that they may be lawfully targetable during wartime? In the case of war, do you have a plan as to what to do if the civilians decide not to participate?
Yeah, thank you for that question, General. Definitely appreciate that. You know, these questions that you're asking, they're true in all domains, whether that is U.S. commercial industry supporting our Maritime Sea Lift Command with additional capacity, whether it's the Civil Reserve Air Fleet that's supporting TRANSCOM and Air Mobility Command, and certainly those same kind of dynamics now are occurring in space. And by the way, we're excited that the Space Force is off working kind of the space equivalent of a Civil Reserve Air Fleet. Hopefully that'll come online later this year or into next year. I already have been given a unified command plan task that says, as directed, it is my responsibility to protect and defend commercial capabilities. And so those key commercial assets that we're responsible or that we operate with today, we already have a plan for that of where we think those are on our critical asset list and what that means for us to defend those if directed. And I think your question was, what would we do if we lost that capability? I think it's, again, true of any of the domains. We have bespoke military capabilities to handle our highest priority requirements. But my experience has been that U.S. contractors, when they've signed a contract, they live up to those requirements and they go into them thoughtfully. And because of our commercial integration cell, the companies that we most often contract with have access to all the threat information that we're seeing day to day. So they understand the environment in which they're operating, and I'm confident they'll be with us there through all the continuum of conflict.
Okay, great. Let's switch to one of our live questions with Mr. Greg Hadley. Greg?
Hi, General. Appreciate you doing this. My question was on, you mentioned your partnerships with the Space Force and intelligence agencies. Obviously, they're also partnering on developing a targeting capability or a moving target indication capability. I was wondering, how does Space Command kind of play into that? And presumably you will be the ones operating the actual satellites in orbit whenever they go up.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I have been given a unified command plan task to provide military ISR capabilities from space. Now, there's a robust discussion ongoing inside the Pentagon right now between the services and intel communities to figure out how best to align a future airborne GMTI type capability. We are a part of those discussions. We're going into them with the approach that we're more interested in the outcome than in the equity that needs to be sorted. But I'm confident that as this discussion moves forward, the nation will find the best answer here to make sure that warfighters get that military ISR support from space that I know the Space Force is intending to build. Thanks for the question.
Okay, let's go to Teresa Hitchens, Breaking Defense.
Thank you, General Whiting, for doing this, and to you guys at Mitchell. First, I have a quick clarifying question, and then actually a real question. The clarifying question is, with regard to the pilot project you mentioned on space situational awareness, when you say you're going to be fusing data to kind of create this holistic picture, are you also talking about fusing in commercial data?
Hey, Teresa, thank you for that clarification question. We are executing a pilot program on data, but it is not tied to necessarily the space domain awareness. It is tied to a mission area that I'll announce here in the coming weeks or months once I've done a little more work on this with our J6. So I just want to be clear, it is a data pilot program, but not necessarily tied to space domain awareness.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. And my real question was about whether, or if you could please explain the difference between what the commercial integration cell is doing and what the JCO does. That's unclear to me how their missions differ and maybe how they integrate if they do.
Yeah, again, thank you for that question as well. So the commercial integration cell is built around the 9 or so companies that probably are the largest companies to contract back to the Department of Defense and the National Reconnaissance Office and NGA to provide services like satellite communications and ISR from space. And once we kind of have those companies now, we cooperate with them on sharing threat information and sharing information about what's happening with our constellations. So that's about safely operating and maximizing our efficiency of operating in space. On the other hand, the Joint Commercial Office, or JCO, that's about taking all sources of unclassified information and being able to bring them together to provide space domain awareness information. So in some cases, we're contracting with companies to get their space domain awareness data, but it's also about taking capabilities from other countries and then fusing all of that together. So one is about safely operating on orbit, and one is about trying to fuse all data that we can on space domain awareness to help provide indications and warning and tipping and cueing of what's happening in space. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Mr. Joe Price. Sir, what is your perspective concerning the future of point-to-point delivery or rocket cargo? Do you feel this future mission should be managed by U.S. Spacecom or U.S. Transcom, or would the two COCOMs share responsibility?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're excited about the work that Air Force Research Lab has done on something like rocket cargo point-to-point delivery. There's a lot to be worked out here and to understand how that would happen. And so today we haven't entered into a discussion yet about who would be responsible for operating that. I have discussed that with General Van Obost at Transcom as far as the overall capability. So, in my mind, let's let the demonstrations continue, and as we start to build out an operational concept that would make sense for the nation, then we can have the discussion of where that's going to go, who's going to have responsibility for it. But today we just want to see, is this a capability that could be useful to us? And I think there's great promise there. So let's continue to work that and prove that to ourselves.
Yeah, that really adds emphasis to the need to have that liaison with Transcom that you're trying to establish.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and again, dedicated to do that this summer.
Well, speaking of liaisons, here's an interesting question from John White. How worrying is the expansion of Chinese ground stations in places like South America? Is U.S. Spacecom looking to work with U.S. Southcom to monitor these sites?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Not only are we looking to do that kind of work, we are actively partnered with other combatant commands like U.S. Southern Command, both through our liaison element that sits down in Miami there with General Richardson and her headquarters, but then also in partnership with the Space Force component that sits at Davis-Monthan. Absolutely, we want to understand Chinese space enabling locations and capabilities around the world and how that might enable their use of space. And so that's a principal thing that we discuss with other combatant commands. And again, it highlights the importance that other combatant commands put on space today as well.
Okay, here's another good one from Mr. Tom Decker. Space forces increasingly look towards harnessing commercial space capabilities using programs like the Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve. As the force receiver, what are the baseline needs you would have in terms of command authority, cybersecurity, integration to make the most of such a service?
Yeah, thank you for that question. CASR that you just mentioned, that is the space version of the Civil Reserve Air Fleet that I mentioned earlier. Both the department and the Space Force have recently put out commercial integration strategies, and they both kind of talk to this idea of balance, that we want to make sure we have the right amount of capability that is coming to us from commercial. We want to take advantage of commercial innovation, commercial cost curves, the speed at which commercial can adapt, while also understanding there are some absolutely military unique requirements that we're gonna satisfy through purpose-built systems that are controlled by the military. Much like rocket cargo, how we control those future commercial capabilities, I'm confident we'll work through that. We've done that today through, for example, satellite communications. We go to the commercial market for a big amount of the bandwidth that we use, and then I'm given a UCP task to be the overall DoD Global SATCOM manager, which gives me that ability to work and manage that as I need. So as different mission areas come on board, depending on who has responsibility, I'm confident we'll put into place those appropriate control mechanisms as we've done to this point already.
Okay, here's one from Shelley Mersch from Inside Defense. With the data fusing test case, will Spacecom be developing that fusion capability or testing capabilities from other organizations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're early in the development of this pilot test case, but we don't think this is a overly difficult technical problem. We think there's lots of applications out there that can help us to fuse the data and then present it in the way that we're going to want to. Now, we have not gone down the technical solution path. We'll figure that out here as we go forward. But my guess is it'll be likely a lot of commercial capability that we'll be bringing on board, and then some obviously in-house expertise and smarts to help configure that and shape it appropriately to make sure that we're getting what we need. But hopefully I'll be able to talk about more details of that in the weeks and months ahead.
And here's one from Lori Cole. Is U.S. Space Command interested in commercial data for cislunar orbit, as well as remote sensing lunar surface data beyond what is provided by NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter? And then what is the best way for commercial companies to start a conversation for this service?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Cislunar is, as I mentioned a little bit in the previous remarks, that is a future mission that we see coming. And we want to make sure we're postured so that there's no technical surprise there, no strategic surprise by somebody going and doing something nefarious there first. The United States Space Force has a squadron that gets presented to U.S. Space Command called the 19th Space Defense Squadron at Dahlgren Naval Base there in Virginia. They are on the lookout for all sources of data to help understand what's happening at the moon and cislunar, whether that's DoD assets, whether it's commercial assets, whether it's NASA. And so that might be a good place to start, is with the Space Force through Space Systems Command and then ultimately to the 19th to start this dialogue of how a partnership might occur. You mentioned remote sensing. That is not something right now that the U.S. Space Command is concerned about on cislunar. We'll see how the future develops. Right now, I just want to make sure I can understand what's going to the moon in orbit, and then maybe over time we'll start figuring out, at least from a U.S. Space Command perspective, how to understand what is happening on the lunar surface. But that is not our principal concern today.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Doug Maynard. What is the target date for U.S. Space Command to have an initial space-based GMTI capability?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I hate to defer a question, but I'll have to ask you to, go to the U.S. Space Force for that. They're the acquiring organization, and so we'll be on the receiving end of that when they're ready to present it. I haven't actually seen that date yet, but eager to get a capability like that on orbit.
Okay, here's one from Mike Friedman. What progress is being made to transfer specific traffic management and space situational awareness responsibility from Space Command to the Department of Commerce?
Yeah, Space Policy Directive 3 a few years ago from the National Space Council directed that transfer of commercial and civil space domain awareness, basic space domain awareness, over to the Department of Commerce. They have been eager and fantastic partners. They are moving forward, working to get to IOC. I can't really speak for them, but I understand that IOC will likely happen later this year, but I would ask to anybody that is really interested in that to validate that with the Department of Commerce. But as they come online to do that portion of basic space situational awareness, sharing with commercial entities, civil entities, that allows us and the Space Force to free up our military personnel to focus on core military tasks. We're still going to be doing space domain awareness and space situational awareness for U.S. Space Command and for the nation on the military side, but it's going to be focused now on maintaining custody of those threats, working with other militaries, while we let Department of Commerce work with the civil and commercial agencies. And again, we're excited about the progress they're making, and as they stand that up, we think there's an opportunity that we're going to be able to leverage all that they're doing to make us even better. So we really do believe this is a synergistic opportunity.
Well, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this Schriever Spacepower series. On behalf of Charles, myself, the entire Mitchell Institute team, we'd like to thank you, General Whiting, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. And for our audience, from all of us at Mitchell Institute Space, have a great space power kind of day.